What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. Today it's the Game Week 20 preview. So you've put to me your questions, your topics ahead of Tuesday's deadline. I'm going to go through some of the big talking points. So Man City midfielders, Leeds Southampton players, wildcard picks. There's a Q&A at the end as well. So make sure you stay tuned for the whole video. Not sure if I'm going to be streaming tonight, which is why I'm putting the Game Week preview out today. Obviously, if I do, I'll set up a stream and you'll see it on YouTube. But that's not 100% going to happen. So just a heads up about that. But otherwise, if you're enjoying the Game Week preview series, please do keep giving them a like. Hit subscribe if you're new around here. Let's jump into it. So I'm going to talk about Manchester City midfielders first. Now, obviously, we're talking about this because of Kevin De Bruyne being injured for 4 to 6 weeks. Even if he was back after just a couple of weeks, he's still going to miss like 3 to 4 game weeks. So he's definite sell for me. There's obviously other options that aren't Man City midfielders that you could go for. And I talked about that in the transfer tips video that I did on Friday. So if you want to check that out, make sure you do. But this is specifically around Man City midfielders because a lot of people are looking to go this way. I put out a tweet the other day saying that you're going for Man City midfielder or a non-Man City midfielder. And the higher percentage was Man City midfielders. And with their fixtures, West Brom, Sheffield United, Burnley, we know we want probably double or triple up in our teams, whether that's double defence and one attacker or whatever. So Man City midfielders are where we're looking. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about how much money you've got in the bank. Yes, most of the time you want to spend that money, get the best players. But as it's looking right now, given that people have got Salah, they've maybe got Fernandes, Kane, Son, and then they've got a downgrade on De Bruyne that's going to give them a lot of money in the bank. I wouldn't worry if you don't spend it straight away, right? Spurs are playing Liverpool this week. That's quite difficult. So if you don't want to go there, you already own Fernandes, you already own Salah, you're potentially going to have a lot of money in the bank. You can save it for a rainy day. You can save it to get De Bruyne back, or you can just spend it next week. So don't panic too much about that. In days gone by, we'd probably look at Sterling as the obvious option, but I think this season's a little bit different. Now, the numbers on screen are expected goals and expected assists per 90 minutes this season so far, right? Now, obviously, you have to take into account that a lot of these players don't necessarily get 90 minutes. So if, for example, they on average got 45 minutes, you'd have to half this number, okay? Obviously, most of them don't get 45. They get 60, 70, whatever it might be. But you've got to take that into consideration. You can't just take the numbers completely at face value. Now, one of the questions that I'm kind of thinking about is what's going to happen to the Man City team without Kevin De Bruyne? Will they get worse? Possibly, right? Everything goes through him. But the fixtures are so good for the next 3 at least West Brom, Sheffield United. Burnley away is probably going to be a little trickier than it was at the Etihad, but I still back Man City to do well. They beat them 5-0 last time, right? And they've done that plenty of times before. So the next 3 are so good, I think that will kind of counteract the De Bruyne is missing. In the tougher games, then they might not be so worth it, but obviously a lot of them are cheap, right? The other thing is who comes into the Kevin De Bruyne role. A lot of people think it's Bernardo Silva. It kind of makes sense. He can play there. And obviously part of Kevin De Bruyne's role is not just going forward, but it's also getting back as well. And Bernardo Silva is a bit of a machine when it comes to going back and forward. So he could come into the spot. If that happens, that's one less player playing wide. So if you've got Sterling on the left, most of the time, Torres could play there, but most of the time it's Sterling, then that might leave more room for Foden and Mahrez to play on that right-hand side. But obviously, this is all trying to second-guess Pep Guardiola, which is difficult. So, ultimately, I think when it comes to minutes, Sterling and Gundogan are probably the best options. Now, numbers-wise, they're quite similar. Expected assists for the season are the same, and expected goals are the same. I usually like season-long stats because you get a larger sample size. We're halfway through the season. That's much better than looking at kind of 2 or 3 games in isolation. It's why I'm not really looking at what they've done without Kevin De Bruyne, because he's only played, I think he's only missed 2 games so far. There's no point in going to look at the stats for those 2 games because it's just a small sample size. So I'm not really worried about that. But we know that Gundogan has started playing in a more advanced position, or at least he's getting further forward, he's getting into the box, he's causing problems. And over the last 6 weeks, he's had the most shots in the box out of all Man City midfielders, including Kevin De Bruyne. So I actually think right now, if you forgot about the money, he's potentially, or arguably, a better option than Sterling. And he has penalties, we think. Now, when he took the last penalty, he did dispatch it really well, but De Bruyne and Sterling weren't on the pitch. I can't imagine they're going to give him back to Sterling after missing 3 in a row. So I think if Gundogan's on the pitch, he'll probably take them, but that's obviously not guaranteed. So I think right now, Gundogan is arguably the best option, even ahead of Sterling, and that lets you spend money elsewhere. And if you've got another big hitter, for example, and you wanted to swap back to De Bruyne, that would be possible later on. You just downgrade that big hitter and you upgrade Gundogan to De Bruyne. But if he keeps up his performances, maybe you don't need to do that, right? So Gundogan looks good. I think if all things were equal minutes-wise, you can see the numbers, right? If they were all going to play 90 minutes, Foden and Mahrez do stick out as good options. So if you wanted to take a punt and you thought that this opportunity was going to give these players with De Bruyne out more minutes, then potentially those two are your punts. For me, Bernardo Silva's got to do so much more, which he might do in a number 10 role, but he would probably be the lowest on the list. For me, Mahrez and Foden are the ones that have got probably the biggest upside if they play, but obviously the biggest risk because they might not get the minutes. Pep Guardiola's been bigging up Foden again. He's kind of been saying he needs to play like Phil, not like De Bruyne, right? He's saying he's not Kevin De Bruyne, but he does usually play wide. So he's probably taking one of those positions rather than Kevin De Bruyne's position. So for me, as it stands, it's the boring pick because that's where everyone's going. But I think Gundogan for me, unless you just want to spend the money on Sterling. I don't think taking a punt on Sterling is a bad idea, by the way. His numbers are pretty good, like Gundogan. We know he's always going to play in that front three and be close to goal. But Gundogan is getting into the box more, is shooting more in the box recently. So the top two are the ones for me. I think Foden and Mahrez are your outside picks. Bit of a punt. They might not get the minutes, but if they do, they'll be great. And then Bernardo Silva, going to play that number 10 role. Might be a bit underrated going into this week, but you've got to expect to see a lot more from him. So he is probably the biggest punt of the lot, I would say. So definitely need to talk about Leeds and Southampton. So in the FA Cup this weekend, Southampton beat Arsenal, which means they're through to the next round. Because of that, Southampton now cannot play their extra fixture, which was delayed or postponed against Leeds in game week 23. So that match is going to have to be put somewhere else. And the odds are it's going to be after game week 26. So for people that kind of loaded up on Leeds and Southampton on game week 16 wildcards, because they had a double game week in 19 at the time, which unfortunately got stopped and postponed, there was some hope that it would then be put into game week 23. But that looks extremely unlikely now. So people that are holding on to them have been asking kind of what to do with them. So for me, Southampton players are probably good to go. Now, Southampton have been playing well all season. We know they're a good team. Ings and Adams have got a really good partnership. Hasenhüttl a great manager. He's got them playing really well, but they are not scoring a huge amount of goals right now. And the fixtures would say that's probably not going to change. So you've got Arsenal at home, difficult enough. Villa at home, difficult enough. And when I say difficult, right, I'm not saying Southampton won't score, but I would say 1 goal, maybe 2 max is the limit, and I could see both those teams plus Man United scoring against Southampton. So I don't fancy the defenders right now. Obviously, if you've got McCarthy, you could keep him, right? And if you've got a wild card coming up, in particular, that probably makes it a little bit easier to get rid. But McCarthy could be held. But I think defender-wise, even though they've been playing well, I don't think these are fixtures to necessarily want to keep them. I don't think you have to go out and just absolutely get rid of them as a priority necessarily. It depends on the rest of your team. But the fixtures don't scream decent results from an FPL point of view to me. And same for the attackers, right? Che Adams, I think, is okay at the moment, but I think there's a lot of better cheap options. Watkins, Bamford in particular, and Antonio as well. And then Ings, we know how good of a finisher he can be, but he hasn't been getting a huge amount of chances this season compared to last either. I think his expected goals per 90 last year, non-penalty, was close to 0.5. This year it's not even 0.3. Now he's had some injuries which maybe affected that, but for whatever reason he's not getting as many chances. And I don't think it's going to happen in these fixtures. I think the Newcastle one in game week 23 is good, but the next 3 aren't great. So Southampton probably okay to get rid of. No double game week until close to 26 at the minimum, and the one between Leeds will probably be rearranged afterwards. For Leeds, I think it's a little bit of a different story. For one, most of their players are probably slightly cheaper than the Southampton players. Depends who you've got. Bamford's obviously cheaper than Ings. Rafinha, a lot of people had. Maybe Dallas in defence, 4.5, who's got good goal threat. I wouldn't rush out to get rid of Leeds players. I know they didn't play well against Brighton, but they've played well for a lot of this season to the point where some of us were looking at doubling and tripling up, and maybe some of you have. They've got to play Newcastle next. Newcastle right now are arguably the worst team in the league, probably the best team to play. If not them, Sheffield United, West Brom, they're all very similar. So I certainly would not want to get rid of my attackers this week, especially Bamford, right? Just because they didn't play well in that Brighton game doesn't mean we should write them off. They've also got Crystal Palace, who have been leaking a few goals recently. Yes, Mitchell's in, but I still think they're there for the taking. I think a team like Leeds will cause them problems. The Everton game is trickier, especially with Everton playing a little bit better defensively now, but that reverse fixture was quite open. And both teams should have scored more. So Everton should have scored more, but Leeds should have scored more as well. So I actually think apart from the Leicester game, their fixtures aren't too bad. And I think they're so cheap, they're worth keeping. Bamford in the forward line, I don't think there's like 7, 8, 9 cheap options where the point where you can just get rid of Bamford. I think he's just not worth a transfer. Rafinha, depending on how many Man City players you got, he's not very far off Gundogan's price. So maybe that's a good swap. But between kind of Souček, Saka, Rafinha, those cheaper midfielders, if we're not talking about Man City ones, again, I'd probably keep Rafinha for now. Defender-wise, you could play them against Newcastle and Palace. They're cheap enough to rotate anyway. So for me, and I know people think I'm like against Southampton, I'm not. I just think the fixtures are difficult. And apart from Ings, I don't know who else I'd really want in that team right now. Leeds, I think, are worth giving at least another chance to see if they come back and absolutely smash it against Newcastle. I think they beat them 5-2 in the reverse fixture. Something's got to change at Newcastle soon, and maybe this will be the fixture it does. But right now, they are awful, and I would just back against them. So I think Leeds is a really good fixture. If they come out and score another kind of 2-3 goals, then we can probably say they're worth keeping just because they're so cheap and provide good value. So if you've got them, probably no double game week coming up in the next kind of 5 to 6 weeks. So keep that in mind. They're not necessarily as kind of desirable to keep. I think for Southampton, you can start thinking about moving them on. For Leeds, I give them a little bit more time just to see how they do. I think the Newcastle fixture in particular will be a good indicator of that. So I had quite a few questions about wildcards, which I was a little bit surprised at. I don't know if Game Week 20 is necessarily the best time to be popping a wildcard. Obviously, some people's teams have just been hit by fixture postponements. So, for example, if you held on to like Leeds and Southampton, you got triple for each team. You're lacking Man City players, for example. Perhaps you've got so many fires to put out, you just want to use it. A lot of people ask me to make drafts. I'm not going to do a wildcard draft in this video. I don't know if I'm going to do one before the Game Week 20 deadline, but I will talk about it. So, one, do I think it's a good week to be wildcarding? I don't particularly, but obviously this all depends on your own team. I can't sit here and tell you it's a good or a bad idea. I can only talk about it in general. Now, a lot of people wildcarding in Game Week 18 and 19. So in 18, it was to attack the blank Game Week and set up for the bench boost in Game Week 19. For those that went in Game Week 19, it was to get their double Game Week teams together, etc. In Game Week 20, it just feels like you're not attacking anything. Right, you're setting up potentially for a double game week in Game Week 26 where we don't even know for sure exactly everyone that's going to be playing. So there's a little bit of guesswork. You've just come out of a blank and a double, which you're already through now. You can't go back and get those points. This week, we've lost De Bruyne. People are worried about Salah. Spurs, who people are maybe going to go for, are playing Liverpool. That's a tough fixture. Liverpool are playing Spurs. That's a tough fixture. No one really wants to touch Chelsea attackers. Everyone's got Fernandes anyway. It doesn't feel like a good week to me unless you want to go completely off the current template, right? But then you're looking at who? Like Grealish, but a lot of people own him anyway. Barnes and Maddison without Vardy. It just doesn't feel like the right time to wildcard. And again, I don't want to put people off. If you're wildcarding, then fair enough. But when you wildcard, you kind of want to not just fix a lot of issues, but also attack. Right, so if you've not got Triple City, etc., and you want it, and you've got a lot of other fires to put out, fair enough. But if you can get by, I would try and hold it till closer to Game Week 26, because by Game Week 24 deadline, we should know who's playing or doubling in Game Week 26. And once we do, that's probably a better time to wildcard, 24 and 25. So if you can get through the next few weeks without it, I'd probably recommend it. If you're using it, I'm not going to do a draft like I said, but I will talk about the picks that would probably definitely be on it. So Man City, I would want 3 because the next 3 fixtures are so good and they have potential to have a double game week before Game Week 26, right? Which is good. And a double in 26 and then maybe one in 27 or whatever beyond. They're going to have quite a few game weeks, double game weeks because they've got fixtures to rearrange. So in defence, I still think João Cancelo is pretty much first choice fullback, but there are going to be times he's rotated. Right now, I don't see Diaz and Stones necessarily getting rotated all that often. Yes, you got Champions League coming back. Yes, Laporte is back fit. He played in the FA Cup. We saw John Stones get a complete rest and Diaz only played 22 minutes. For me, they are the first choice partnership. I would choose 2 of those 3. I think if I was going right now, I'd probably put Diaz in and then decide whether to spend the extra on Cancelo or just get Stones. But I'd want double defence. Their defending stats are ridiculous. The amount of clean sheets since Diaz come in is ridiculous. The fixtures are ridiculous for clean sheets. It'd be ridiculous to go without 2, I think, especially without De Bruyne, right? If you had De Bruyne and Gundogan as options, for example, Gundogan and Sterling, Gundogan and Foden, then maybe you go double attack. But as it stands right now, I think you go double defence. And I've put midfielder because I've already talked about the midfielders. You can pick one from there. Villa, I wouldn't necessarily go triple up, but I think a double up is probably worthwhile. I think Ollie Watkins, if you want to go cheaper in attack, is really good. Not just because he scored last night. I've liked him all season. His numbers are good. I think with Barkley back, it puts Grealish on the left. That's better all round as well. So Grealish for me would definitely be in a wildcard team. Probably Watkins, unless I wanted to go for Kane. If I went Kane, which I probably would look at because I'd want Spurs players going forward, not necessarily for this week, but in general, you've got to think ahead if you're wildcarding this week. Then you'd only need 2 other cheap attackers, maybe even 1 if you're going 3-5-2. And Antonio, Watkins, and Bamford would be my choice of 3. So you've probably got to pick 2 from there. And if you want to go for a defender, obviously it's going to depend on your keeper setup. And Martinez could be an option too. And Matt Target if you want to go a little bit cheaper, right? Because he's attacking fullback and he costs a lot less than all the other defenders. That's where I would look. Kane and Son, I would probably have at least 1. I don't like the fact they play Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City in the next 5, but ultimately they have good fixtures either side of those, and they're going to have a good double game week almost certainly, and they're going to have future double game weeks too. So I'd probably have both in the current situation, but if I was going for 1, I don't know. Actually, I don't know who I'd definitely go for. I'm probably going to have Son in my team. I'm not sure about Kane, but if I was wildcarding, I'd probably want to fit Harry Kane in there. And then for Man United, I'd have Bruno Fernandes. You could look at a defender or David De Gea because the fixtures are quite good right up until 26. You could look at Rashford, but Fernandes would be the definite. So I don't want to go through, like I said, a whole draft. I'm not going to go through specific picks, but these are what I'd be looking at. Triple City still, Bruno Fernandes, that's 4, Kane and or Son, and then at least 2 from Aston Villa because I think the fixtures are good. They got fixtures to rearrange, and they're just still such good value. So I don't necessarily think that the wildcard is the best. I don't think it's the best time to play the wildcard necessarily. But if you go into, there's some picks. Let me know below who's playing it and which are your main picks for your wildcard side in Game Week 20. So I just want to go through a few other questions that came up quite a bit without doing their own separate kind of screen and going into as much detail. So the first one is what to do with Liverpool players, right? And they are, some people would say out of form. I would say they've been unlucky, right? The chances of them not scoring any goals in the last 4, given the amount of chances they've had and created, is very low. I'm not saying it's the same Liverpool side we've seen smash the Champions League, smash the league in the last couple of seasons. They're not blowing teams away like Man City potentially were just before De Bruyne got injured. Like against Villa, Man City were incredible, the amount of chances they created. Yes, in the end, the first goal was debatable in whether it should have stood, etc. And obviously then they just got a penalty as well. But they had enough chances to put that game to bed a lot earlier. So Liverpool aren't blowing teams away right now, but I do think they've been a bit unlucky. I've spoken about in other videos that the amount of chances, like I've been looking quite a bit this year at expected goals, right? I'm trying not to look at too many stats. I'm trying to keep it simple. So I've looked at expected goals and used it quite a lot in my thinking. Now, I'll just briefly go over this again, right? So I think it's roughly in the last 4 weeks, they've created something like 6.52 expected goals. I think they've scored no goals or 1 goal, something like that. In the previous games, they scored like 14 from an expected goals of 7.5. So there's massive variance, right, where they overperformed, and there's massive variance where they've underperformed. But overall, it's equaled out. It's like 13.83 expected goals, and they've scored 15. So it's almost worked out completely. So to me, they are going to keep creating chances over the next few games, and they are going to score. Right, they will. They're just not going to go another 2 or 3 games creating that many chances and not scoring. And to me, if you've got Salah and Mane already, it's such a luxury right now to transfer them out, especially if you've got De Bruyne. Like, De Bruyne is the priority. He's out for ages. Yes, Liverpool's fixtures are tricky enough, right? Their next 3 are Spurs, Brighton, West Brom, or Spurs, West Ham, Brighton, I think the order is. So they're not the easiest fixtures, but they're not awful either. So I think unless you've got a luxury where your squad is completely fine and you want to swap Salah to Fernandes or Grealish or Son, whoever it is, then fair enough. Right? I wouldn't say they've been playing so well you have to keep them, but I will be keeping Salah. I think if you look ahead to captaincy for the next few weeks, in Game Week 22 he plays Brighton, and if you look at the other fixtures, it's quite difficult to pick out an obvious captain. I think Liverpool might be the best, and the reverse game was quite open. And Brighton actually did really well, and they probably should have scored more goals, to be honest. But Salah had a few chances; they just didn't quite go his way. But on another day, he scored 1 or 2 goals. Right, he had a decent amount of chances. Yes, Jota was playing in that game, so maybe that helped, and maybe he's part of the reason they're missing. But they've created enough. Like Pope got some very easy saves to make where he racked up his save points, but he also made some really good ones. There was that Salah chance, we saved it with his left hand, bottom corner, great save. On another day that goes in, Salah's got points, we're not worried about him. So I would keep. Someone asked me about benching them. Surely you haven't got a good bench where you're benching them against Spurs. Like, Spurs are good, but I think Liverpool are better still, right? In terms of defenders, I do think there's a case to be made to swap to Man City defenders instead. They provide you with more money, and arguably right now they look better defensively anyway. I still think the Liverpool defence is solid. Once Matip's in there and stays fit, which I know is difficult, next to Fabinho, who's been brilliant at centre-back, they've got their 2 first-choice full-backs, they've got Alisson. Once Henderson is back and in that midfield, I think they're going to be fine. So I wouldn't rush to sell their defenders, but I do think there's a case to be made to swap them to cheaper ones right now. But Salah is a luxury move, and I think he'll be fine. That's what I'm doing anyway. You don't have to agree. If you want to get rid of him, go for it. When a hit's worth it? Lots of hits questions this week. I think because people took a lot over the double game weeks, especially someone asked about using hits to take money off the bench. So for those of us that set up with a wildcard to bench boost, you might have extra money on there. When do you take hits to take it out? First of all, I wouldn't worry about having that extra money on the bench. Like, there's no, especially if you're selling De Bruyne to like Gundogan or Foden, you're going to have loads of money anyway. So don't panic about having to get rid of it. The ideal situation would be to roll a transfer, have 2, and maybe make 3. So take a -4, but you get to swap 3 players and you get to reduce a couple of bench positions. But it's I don't know, it's hard to say it's a priority. Like, I've got David De Gea on my bench. I got Saka and Chris Wood, who are all more than kind of 5 million. But if I don't need the money and I don't have to play them, I can just bench them. There's no rush to do it. So hits are only worth it when you want to bring in a player that's going to be a long-term move, basically. Like for double game weeks, for example, I would always take hits if I also want to keep the player long-term. If you're just taking a hit to bring someone in for 1 week and then get rid of them, then I probably wouldn't do it. Like Son, for example, this week, I don't know if I would take a hit to bring him in just because I've got the money, because he's playing Liverpool. Right, and that's a difficult fixture. So I'd maybe just wait a week to bring him in. So same situation with hits all the time. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. You're taking a risk. Ultimately, the player you're bringing in, I know this sounds very simple, has to score at least 4 points or more. Right, and most of the time it's difficult to 100% say that's going to happen. And if you don't want that player long term, then I think the hit's even less relevant. So if you really want to bring, like if I wanted to bring Son in now, and I'm saying I'm going to keep him for 7 or 8 weeks, then yeah, maybe you do take the hit, especially if you need to get money off the bench to do it. But I wouldn't kind of rush to do that, basically. How much to spend on the bench? So a lot of people worried with everything going on, fixture postponements. For me, I just want to play in bench. I'm not worried about spending 5-6 million on these positions. Like right now, I've got quite a pricey bench because I've just wildcarded, but I would be happy with probably a non-playing keeper still. It is risky, but I think I would do that still. A 4.5... Like the thing is, Smith Rowe, for example, is a brilliant benched option in midfield. If you're playing 3-4-3, he's the best. He's 4.5, around that price. He's the cheapest player that's playing regularly. He plays for Arsenal, who are doing well. The fixtures aren't great, but he's just a bench player. He's brilliant. And then 2 4.5 million defenders. I wouldn't want to be spending 5.5... because it takes money off the rest of your 11. Granted, a lot of people right now, again, especially if they're transferring out to Bruyne, have got a lot of money, but at some point you're going to want to spread that around your first 11. If you've got money spread thinly across 15 players and no wildcard to sort it out later on, it's very difficult to get those funds spread again. So I wouldn't try and do it too much. For me, it's not about how much you're spending, it's about whether the players are playing. I wouldn't want to go in now with kind of 2 outfield players that don't play, like bench fodder. I'd want to have at least 2 playing players, maybe 3, potentially a goalkeeper, but I don't think I would personally spend that. Like once I got the money to get rid of De Gea, I probably will. Or once I got the free transfers. So yeah, not about how much you spend, it's about who plays, etc. You don't need to be spending 5-6 million. Lastly, Vardy, Barnes, Maddison. Again, if you want to look at Vardy replacements, I talked about that on the transfer tips video. A lot of people were looking at Barnes and Maddison, but are now worried about how they'll perform without Vardy. Leicester are still a really good side, right? We can wait and see what happens in the FA Cup, because obviously they're playing that without Vardy. Interestingly, Rodgers did say it could just be a week, but still probably at least 2 game weeks. So if you don't want to keep Vardy long term, and if he's going to miss that Leeds match, potentially you just get rid. For me, there's better options than Barnes and Maddison anyway. I do think it probably puts a little bit more emphasis on obviously them trying to score goals, and Barnes for me is the better option for that. I just worry about the amount of long shots that Maddison has to take to try and score. So if I was going to get one, it would still be Barnes, But I think if you've got the money to go to Grealish, for example, personally, I think he is a better option. And yes, you'd have to say that without Vardy, Leicester are going to be a slightly weaker team. But overall, they're still a really good team. That they are probably going to create chances for whoever plays up front instead. So if you're going for them and you're still confident, then do it. If you're slightly worried already and now Vardy's out, I'd probably just advise against it and maybe look at someone like Grealish who isn't that much more money. So there we go. That's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. If you have enjoyed it, please do give it a like and hit subscribe if you're new around here. And obviously hit that notification bell so you know when all my other videos are going up. And leave a comment below if you agree, disagree, got any other questions. Leave a comment and I'll try and get back to as many as possible. Like I said, I'm not sure if I'm streaming tonight, but either way, I'll have a team selection video tomorrow, so I'll let you know exactly what I'm doing with Bruyne. On Tuesday, there should be a captaincy as well as a deadline stream as well. So make sure you check out all of that. And if you want to support me and the channel a little bit further, come and join the over 200 Let's Talk FPL members we got on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description below. So everyone that signs up goes up on the Legends wall. So thank you very much to everybody that has already signed up and is supporting me and the channel even further. There's perks and benefits over there. You can go and check them depending on the different tiers that you sign up for. And a big shout out to Mo AM, Louis A, and Eddie N, who have all signed up since the last video. Big shout out to you and thank you to everyone that's supporting. Please do keep liking these videos, hitting that subscribe button. We're well over 133,000 subscribers now, which is absolutely mad. I might see you for a stream later on. If not, I'll see you tomorrow for the team selection video. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of the weekend and I'll catch you again soon.